What would it take to arouse your life, to experience more connection, more pleasure, more realness in and outside of the bedroom? I'm August McLaughlin, and this is Girl Boner Radio.
I was trying to find my sense of self-worth. I was trying to find my sense of contentment, who I was outside of me, instead of looking within to be like, well, what do I think? What do I feel? Am I enough?
I don't think that I should stay silent about it. I am not ashamed of things that have happened to me or things I've done. I stood up for myself, and I'm standing up for myself now.
It's hard to put into words just how much digital technology impacts our sex lives and relationships. There are obviously tons of perks, things like having some actually helpful sex ed information at our fingertips. And there's a dark side, where trolls and predators lurk. Today, you'll hear the stories of two women who've experienced that dark side while they were seeking meaningful connection. And both of their stories involve so much more than that, including a lot of pleasure, real intimacy, and hope. As a heads up, this episode touches on sensitive topics like abuse and eating disorders. Please take care of yourself while you listen. First, queer content creator and writer, Ginelle Testa's story.
Honestly, the earliest memory I have of sex and sexuality is the chat rooms.
The chat rooms. Early in her memoir, Make a Home Out of You, Ginelle talks about being bullied at middle school, rushing home and then being hassled by her mom, when all she really wanted to do was escape to those rooms to find some connection.
I was going in just to chat, just to play dress up, and I learned that people were talking about things that I had sometimes heard about on AOL and AIM chat.
Things like sex. And quickly, many of the connections she made became sexual.
It was this website called the Doll Palace where you dressed up as an avatar, and I learned that the sexier your avatar, the more attention you got from men.
Looking back, Ginelle sees that she was seeking validation through how she looked, even as an avatar, given all of that attention. So she started dressing the part.
I chose a redhead with red boots, and I just chose one that had skimpy clothes on. But I remember going into the room and seeing dolls in different corners, and you could find a corner and start talking to people, and you would see their text bubbles pop up next to their avatars. They were just talking casually, but it eventually would seem to always lead to someone being hit on or someone saying something inappropriate.
And that, still when she was a kid, led to webcamming.
Where I was using webcam to get further validation and attention from men, and I was trading it for game coins. I was trading it for monetary value in the game website that we were playing. This was a different website. It was called Gaia Online. That was the next step after Doll Palace, and I started to do that, and it's just really sad to think about in hindsight, a 13-year-old doing that.
Meanwhile, she was struggling with anorexia. There's a lot of crossover, by the way, between eating disorders and being sexually objectified. It's a connection Ginelle knows too well.
I really, really wanted to be thin, and then these men were complimenting me on how thin I was and how beautiful and skinny I was, and so it definitely played into that spiral of I need to be as thin as possible in order to be lovable.
The internet fueled her eating disorder in other ways too.
It was Tumblr era, so there were pro-anorexia pages that were really popular, that nothing tastes as good as thin feels, and a moment on the lips, a lifetime on the hips. Those sort of taglines were all over my Tumblr pages, and so were thin bodies and protruding hip bones. And the internet was just a toxic place for me as a kid. I think I should not have had access to the internet, at least unsupervised, because I just was dealing with a lot of stuff, and it was a toxic outlet.
Some of that stuff involved physical abuse at home, which flared up, she said, as she grew into a feisty teen.
My mom and I have a much better relationship today. It's not perfect, but there was abuse, and I think that it contributed to me finding this solace online. I think that feeling like I was bad and broken, which is the way that I felt when I was being abused, made me feel like I needed to seek out external validation. And I hate to draw like a direct parallel, but it's the reality.
In her memoir, Ginelle calls her maternal grandmother, her Nana, her saving grace.
She and I were just so close, and she was just really special to me. She was somebody that I always felt safe with, someone who was really kind to anyone she met. She was really a lovely person and like easy to talk to. But if you crossed her, she was really feisty. She kind of held grudges sometimes, but she never held a grudge against me. If I did something wrong, she was able to forgive me and move on.
By then, drinking alcohol was a part of Ginelle's life too. And her first romantic relationship was with this boy called Anthony when she was 15. Before I met Anthony, she wrote, I had been making a home in booze. But he became my home, and I felt high from having someone in my life who loved me. When I got to that part of your book, I felt like this whole body exhale at first because it seemed like things were really good for you finally, but it didn't stay that way.
He was, yeah, really lovely at first. He seemed like somebody just that would accept me as I was. He never said anything about my eating disorder. He never discouraged it or encouraged it, but he just sort of let me exist and do my thing. So I felt very supported by him in that way, for better or worse, I don't know. But yeah, there were a lot of ways that I just felt like finally like I could breathe again.
Even early on, though, there were signs that things weren't as great as they seemed.
Remember, like, he threw my shoe in the trash when we were at the bowling alley, and I was like, okay, that's kind of mean, but like maybe he's flirting with me.
Soon, the abuse was obvious.
It started with throwing things and kicking things in my room, and then it escalated to hitting me or like pushing me up against the wall or choking me with the seatbelt. Yeah, it was really bad.
Ginelle fought back.
I got violent back with him at the time. I was not willing to let him do that without, like, I remember one time I like threw a computer monitor at him. Like, it was both ways. I mean, he initiated it, and obviously he was stronger than me, so it was pretty brutal, but I think I was just a really unhealthy relationship to start with.
Within about a year, they reached a breaking point.
It ended with him threatening to kill me after choking me with the seatbelt, and he said he was going to kill me and bury my body behind a restaurant nearby. So I was like, this is not okay. Like, this has escalated so far that I don't even know what to do. So that's when I called Nana, and Nana was like, you need to go upstairs and like lock your doors and potentially go to the police.
It can be tough to end abusive relationships at any age, partly because the abused person often still cares about the abuser, but lingering feelings and all, Ginelle was finished.
That was my reality, is that he was like bugging me at school and like calling me and trying to make contact, and I was just done. I did still have like, oh my God, what if he's my person and I'm messing this up? But I was just so scared and so done that it wasn't worth it anymore.
A year later, Ginelle started therapy, getting emotional support that she had really needed. And what prompted it was dark.
Yeah, the final straw for therapy for my parents was my drug overdose, when I did a lot of acid and mushrooms at the same time and ended up hallucinating and having to go to the hospital.
She wrote about the experience like this. I slammed the bathroom door behind me, turned my head toward the mirror, and saw two scaly demons hovering over me. They were grayish green, with slimy skin, like gooey aliens that had just hatched from a monstrosity of an egg. The worst part was the piercing red eyes that seemed to be able to see right into my soul. Ginelle feared that the demons would kill her. When she had the wherewithal to seek help, she called her Nana. Shortly after, Ginelle was on a gurney, headed for the hospital. That's when a family friend told Ginelle's mom to take her daughter to therapy.
My mom did. So of all my mom's flaws, she did take me to therapy when I was 16, and she did do therapy with me for almost a year.
It was a type called dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT.
Yeah, it was wildly helpful. One of the things that was most helpful was the emotion regulation piece. I was actually given tactics to deal with the emotional reactions I was having.
Later on, Ginelle would be diagnosed with bipolar, but at the time, even without having a totally clear understanding of that, the exercises she learned made a big difference.
For example, I would be taught to hold a frozen orange, or take a hot shower, or go for a walk. I was given these practical things to do to deal with my angst and all the mental health concerns I was having, and I was better able to cope, I think.
She also started to unpack the trauma she was carrying.
I didn't realize I had trauma. It was really validating and really scary, naming it for what it was, but at the same time, it was shedding light on it.
Today, Ginelle identifies as queer, but back then she didn't.
I definitely identified as straight, but in early days on the forum, sometimes I would pretend to be a guy so that I could talk to girls. I would send fake pictures and be like, yeah, I'm a guy, because I wanted to talk to women, which is so confusing. I didn't really know why I was doing that. And then as I got older, I started to kiss girls when I was drinking. So I thought I was straight, and I thought that was just things that had happened, but foreshadowing.
During college, Ginelle came out to her therapist.
And, it's just I'm ready to start dating women. I went to college that had a lot of queer people. It was a Catholic private university, but for some reason there were a lot of lesbians and queer folks. So I was like, wow, they're really comfortable with themselves. Maybe I could do something like that.
That night, she decided to come out to her Nana, too. She was pacing around her dorm room, clutching her phone, her internal butterflies just swirling, when she called her. She wrote that it came out almost incoherently, and she had to pause to regain her composure and just let out her breath. She said, I'm bisexual. There was a pause on the other end, and she thought, oh my gosh, I should not have told her. Her Nana was Catholic after all, and even though she knew that her Nana wouldn't hate her, she still thought that in some way she'd reject her. But instead, Nana said,
I'll dance at your wedding, whether it's a man or a woman. So I was really happy about that.
Confidence boosted, Ginelle was ready to explore.
And I found a girl in a dating app.
Her name was Penny. The two chatted off and on for a few days. Then they planned a date.
She had lived a half hour from me in Massachusetts. I was in New Hampshire, and we met about halfway at the beach.
Penny smelled like Old Spice, Ginelle wrote, and wore an orange tee that hugged her thin frame and almost flat chest. Her hair was tied up with athletic tape.
I just remember we were walking along the beach, and we stayed until the sun went down. And I definitely remember holding hands and just being like, wow, this is really nice to do, not in the dark.
They shared a kiss under the moonlight. Ginelle pulled away and said, wow, it's really nice to do that sober. Penny and Ginelle went on to date for close to a year, a relationship with ups and downs and a lot of newness. Going down on a girl, for example, was out of Ginelle's comfort zone. And after a while, she wondered if she hadn't figured it out yet, was she even queer? At the same time, she welcomed new kinds of intimacy and pleasure. Ultimately, though, Ginelle decided she wanted only friendship with Penny. A few more relationships followed, and Ginelle struggled with everyone. At one point, while she was dating a guy exclusively, she made out with her ex Anthony at a bar. Everything after that makeout session went blank. She had blacked out and felt utterly lost. So she joined Alcoholics Anonymous, AA, worked the 12 steps, and got sober, figuring sobriety would fix her relationship challenges.
And it didn't. I still had stuff to work on.
Case in point, the time she got involved with a married colleague.
Just emotionally. And it got to the point where I was like, I will sleep with this person if he lets me. And I was like, that feels terrible.
she confided in a friend who suggested she join Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, SLAA, or SLAW. Expert views are mixed on whether sex and love are truly addictive. I've talked to marriage and family therapists who treat both as addictions, and sex therapists who prefer different terms focused on behaviors like compulsions. As I've shared before, I care less about the terminology and more about people getting the support they need. Ginelle found SLAW deeply helpful. She said it helped her start healing her life beyond just drinking, and she started to see really important patterns in her life.
I either felt like too much or not enough. That was the basis of it. And when I started to get sober, I started to really heal my relationship with my body too. So the eating disorder stuff sort of worked itself out because I got a dietitian and I got the help that I needed.
A health at every size dietitian, she noted. Ginelle considers the hardest part of her healing work the work she did through SLAW, partly because the program advised against dating for the first year.
It was challenging because I had tried not dating in AA, and I did that for a year, but I was like white knuckling it. Like I was miserable the whole time. It took me a few years to be willing to do that in SLAW. Like I was like pushing back against it. I was like, I don't really need this. This is too dramatic. Like these people are, they're trying to throw away masturbation and like, whatever. Like I just didn't want to do what they were telling me to do. And eventually I got to a point where I was like, I'm willing to take a break. I'm ready to take a break. And I did it.
That was 5 years ago when her deepest healing began, which interestingly is right where her memoir ends.
People are like telling me, I wish there was more to your book. I'm like, well, I guess you just have to wait for a sequel. But I started to heal in 2019 when I took that year off from dating. And then I started to learn to date in a healthy way. I had my first healthy relationship. And since then, it's just been continuous healing and feeling more peace in that area of my life.
Ginelle told me that her latest adventure has been healing codependency. It's a challenging dynamic where one person needs the other person who in turn needs to be needed in order to feel valuable.
And I'm in a new relationship where he's not codependent at all. He's the first person probably I've ever dated that isn't. And I'm learning my tendencies that I thought were healed. I'm learning to tackle those. For example, last night I was having a hard time. I'm struggling with the vulnerability of this book and releasing it and knowing that the whole world is going to read like all my deepest, darkest secrets. And I was just having a night where I was spiraling a little bit. And instead of being like, I need you to fix it, partner, I told him I was struggling. We talked about it for a few texts back and forth. And then I called a friend and I journaled and I took a shower. I did some mix of like leaning on others, but self-soothing. And I think that's something that codependency didn't allow me to do because I would just be like, my partner needs to fix how I'm feeling right now. And instead I was able to say like, I'm going to do this on my own and with a little bit of help. I made it through the night. I felt better this morning and yeah, it's all good.
Ginelle's relationship with her sexuality and her body have continued to grow too.
I feel like I finally got to a place where right now I'm the fattest I've ever been and like I'm the happiest I've ever been with my body. And I feel like that's been the case for a couple of years and I can just exist. Like I don't have to try to change my body. I don't have to try to be different than I am. I don't have to worry about if I'm enough for another person. Like I know that I'm enough and I only seek out people who also believe that. And so our sex is not contingent on like whether I look a certain way. It just is because we like each other and we're attracted to each other and that's it.
Ginelle has evolved so much since her early days, back when she sought validation in chat rooms as a kid. Today, she uses the internet very differently. She told me she's found such vibrant and supportive community through social media, one that's elevated and held her through her body acceptance journey. She has all kinds of reels about body love and body acceptance that reach and resonate with so many people. Those messages ring true in her book too, which is so aptly named. I asked her about the title.
Make a Home Out of You came to me randomly. It seemed almost in a magical, almost spiritual way. I was brainstorming and asking people and all I did is give it a little bit of space and like the idea came in and then I realized it made sense across the whole storyline that I was trying to make a home in substances, in people, in behaviors, instead of in myself. I was trying to find my sense of self-worth. I was trying to find my sense of contentment, who I was outside of me, instead of looking within to be like, well, what do I think? What do I feel? Am I enough? I think by the end of the book, I find that contentment. And it's only the beginning of the journey. It's like I said, some people are like, oh my God, Ginelle, we just want to know what happens next. Like, well, yeah.
You're like, so do I.
Did you know that sex toys can make orgasms last longer? They also make big O's more likely if you've struggled in that department. Whether you use a toy alone or with a partner, I highly recommend having at least one that you love. If you want to stock up on toys or your favorite lube, or get a really fancy designer one, you can get free, always discreet shipping on orders over $75 at The Pleasure Chest. Simply head to thepleasurechest.com and search by category for vibrators, strap-ons, kink accessories, toys for couples, and more. Basically, you can build your own pleasure chest by shopping at thepleasurechest.com. I'll share some related advice from Ginelle in a bit. But first, Nancy Jo Sales' story. I first shared it back in 2021 after reading her compelling memoir, and I thought about it a lot while I was working on Ginelle's story.
You know, I wanted to be very real in this book and say things that were not typically allowed as women to say, even in 2021. I feel like there's still a lot of silencing of women, silencing of our stories, silencing of our experience, just all the ageist things, being 50 something years old and enjoying having sex still with people who are quite a bit younger, like maybe in their 20s.
That's Nancy Jo Sales, famed Vanity Fair writer, award-winning journalist, and New York Times best-selling author. The book she was just talking about is her latest. It's called Nothing Personal: My Secret Life in the Dating App Inferno. It's a memoir about coming of middle age in the midst of the online dating revolution. If you have ever felt overwhelmed by swipe culture, you are so far from alone. And there are so many reasons behind these challenges. Nancy Jo explores pretty much all of them in her book. She also delves into some of the roots of the problems that big dating can both reflect and exacerbate, including ways kids who are socialized as girls are objectified from the get-go. She told me that she herself was very sexualized from an early age, and that harmed and affected her entire life until now. She also recalls being a sexual being, as we all are, from early on, and pointed out that there is a huge difference between being a sexual person and being sexualized. Nancy Jo recalls having normal sexual feelings as a child.
For example, I knew that I wanted to kiss boys from a very young age. My heart kind of fluttered when I watched James Bond movies with my dad. I'd go to the theater and see Sean Connery take his shirt off and just be like, "Oh, I like the way that looks." What I found out very early on as a little girl, I guess, is I found that I was straight and that I wanted to have a boyfriend. And I had thoughts like, what do I do to get one? How do you do that?
So, how is that different from sexualization? I often describe it like this. Our sexuality comes from within us. It's an inherent part of who we are. Being sexualized is when we are forced to be seen as sexual or treated in sexual ways without our consent. Nancy Jo is a renowned expert on this topic. She told me that sexualization plays out in so many ways for girls.
In almost every aspect of our culture, in movies, TV, music videos, video games, toys, everything you can possibly think of that a girl engages with in culture, social media for sure. What it means is that a girl is taught that her value is through being sexy. What gets her likes on social media, what gets her attention, what gets her validation is sexiness.
One study showed that during 1 year, school-age kids may take in as many as 80,000 quote-unquote sexy girl portrayals in TV programming marketed toward kids. And research has also shown that girls as young as 5 commonly aspire to look sexy. So how does that affect us into adulthood? I can't even imagine counting the ways. But sexualization of girls is linked with poor body image, eating disorders, depression, heightened stress and anxiety, just to name a few problems. When you take these factors into online dating, where so much of it is about photos and stats, it's, well, complicated. So Nancy Jo knew a lot about these cultural factors and ways they were impacting the dating spheres when she decided to try dating apps herself at age 49.
I had a younger man in my life and I kind of got my heart broken. And I just was like running along the river and I felt like I was having a heart attack. And I was not having a heart attack, but I might have been having something like a broken heart. So I was sad. And so I went in my Sake Bar Satsuko, my place where I go. And there's this bartender in there named Mike. And I told all this to Mike. And he said, why don't you just fuck somebody on Tinder? Or why don't you just go on a dating app and fuck somebody? Because that's what I always do. He said, just fuck away the pain. I was like, do I really want to do that? These dating apps, from everything I've heard, just seem awful. And I know all these young girls have had these terrible experiences on them. But there I went, wandering into the wilderness, like the beginning of Dante's Inferno. In the beginning of Dante's Inferno, he says he's in midlife and he wanders into the wilderness. And then he starts to see and experience all of these horrible things.
Soon it was time for her first date via app. She started chatting with a man on OkCupid. After some back and forth, including a booty call attempt from him, he agreed to meet her at a wine bar. And she did get some sex, as her bartender friend had suggested, but not quite the therapeutic kind.
Well, that was bad sex. It was some of the worst sex I have ever had in my entire life. And this young man, I call him in the book Jack the Skateboard Boy. He just had this kind of snide, sort of condescending kind of thing. By the time we were ready to have sex, I had him saying things to me like, I'm actually having a good time. I was like, well, isn't that what we're supposed to do on a date? He was one of those people who's fallen into that unfortunate mode. But then I, cajoled him out of it and got into like, we were having a good time. We're talking, we're laughing, we're drinking beer.
After a bit, she told him she was tired. She walked him out and guided him to her building nearby, then into the building's little dark gym. There, he pushed her up against a wall and they started kissing. She said he was a good kisser, but she just wasn't feeling anything. Then he dropped to his knees pretty suddenly to go down on her. As he did, she said she felt the same boredom she had felt while they were texting.
And I didn't even really know why I was doing it. And I guess it was just like this experience where you're having sex, it's not really good, you don't really like it, but you just go through with it because it's like sort of get it over with kind of thing. And then when it was over, he said, yeah, I had fun. I might call you, I might not, but nothing personal if I don't.
I don't know about you, but I really felt sorry for both of them listening to that. These ideas about caring less and women being sex objects hurt men too. They leave men feeling like they aren't allowed to be vulnerable or take their time or be kind, and as though there's something wrong with them if they don't want to have sex all the time. Nancy Jo acknowledges that dating apps are often different for anyone who's not straight or interested in a heterosexual relationship. In her documentary, there's a great scene where she interviews gay men who said they are so grateful they finally have a way to easily meet people to date or have sex with. She also realizes that there are exceptions to these yuck experiences. We will get to some of that in a bit here. But first, another one of her dating through app experiences. As a heads up, it's an especially dark one. that involves violence and non-consent. It does end on a better note. It involves someone she calls in her book the choking boy. She described him as big and beefy, like a football player.
I matched with him on, I think it was Tinder, and I was in Louisville, Kentucky, where I was filming some stuff for my documentary. I matched with him. We met in the hotel bar. We're laughing, we're joking, we're talking. It's really, really fun. And we're getting along. And we came up to my room. We started having sex. And he starts choking me. So this is not BDSM. This is not like a mutually agreed upon act. This is his big, beefy ham hock hands and his big hammer of thumbs against my throat, and very tight, while he's really pounding away. And me thinking like, oh my God, he's going to kill me. So I take my big, strong Jewish peasant woman legs, inherited from my grandmother, and I put them up on him, and he went flying. Like it was like a cartoon. Like he went flying across the room. And he said, "What did you do that for? What's wrong with you? What did you do that for?" And I scrambled up off the bed. I thought he was maybe a murderer. So I scrambled up off the bed. I was looking for a weapon. And I was like, "Don't come near me." And he's like, whoa, wait a minute. What's wrong with you? And I was like, "What's wrong with you? You're choking me." And he's like, "But girls like to be choked." And I said, "Why do you think girls like to be choked?" And he's like, "Well, they always like it in porn." He says, "I want to show you."
He opened his laptop and started showing her the vast amounts of choking videos on Pornhub. There are so many choking videos in mainstream porn, Nancy said, that research shows that many people, especially young women, have been led to believe that choking is a standard part of sex, whether you're into it or not.
So this did not feel good to me. I did not want to be choked. I told him this. It was a really amazing conversation because I think we both learned something about each other. And then we wound up having really great sex that same evening because we had talked about what we like and don't like. And we had had a conversation and we had communicated and we started to be more intimate through sharing with each other.
At a certain point, while using the apps, Nancy Jo did find someone with whom she developed a relationship she described as really close, intimate, sexual, exciting, and sweet. It was with a man in his 20s named Abel. He'd come from very impoverished circumstances and had grown up without internet or cell phones.
He wanted to be a musician in New York, and he came to New York, got a job. He was lovely, just really lovely. And we were lucky in the sense that we clicked and had a lot of fun together.
They had what Nancy Jo described as a situationship with no labels. He was seeing other people, and so was she for a time. While she didn't think of Abel this way at the time, she said he became almost like a case study.
A good-looking young man who comes to New York City and he gets a phone, he gets Tinder. In our city, there's a lot more single women than men. And the women in New York City are amazing. They are just the most accomplished, cool women. I mean, women all over the world are fantastic, but New York has really some really cool, exciting women. What dating apps do is provide what seems to be in the minds of men perceived as unlimited access. And I watched this change him. And I watched his focus become very, very scattered.
Nancy Jo and Abel stayed friends and had sex off and on for some time. Once she saw that he was labeling women in his phone by things like bra size, though, she was done. That isn't to say that Nancy Jo doesn't believe you can find meaningful hookups, healthy relationships, or lasting love on dating apps.
Of course, true connections happen. I know this. We all know this. And we've even seen marriages. And I never for a second would deny that it's impossible. But I do think that whether you're old, young, whatever, that all of this technology makes trust way harder and interferes with your ability to commit to each other and your ability to focus on each other. There's even a word for it among sociologists. It's called technoference.
Even having your phone or iPad nearby, say on the table while you're eating, makes you less likely to hear or focus on a person you're with. There are a whole bunch of studies about this. According to one, published in Psychology of Popular Media Culture, quote, allowing technology to interrupt conversations, activities, and time with romantic partners, even when unintentional or for brief moments, can send implicit messages about what they value most, leading to conflict and negative outcomes in personal life and relationships. In other words, as tech use goes up, intimacy goes down. In response to her work, Nancy Jo often hears from people who feel defensive. They often say things like, well, I found love. We met on an app. We're married. It's great. Tinder's great. I asked her how she responds.
This is what I would say to this person. I'm so glad that you feel that it worked for you. And I'm happy for you. But it's not a binary. Like, just because you got married to someone you met on Plenty of Fish doesn't mean Plenty of Fish is good, or that dating apps are good. It doesn't mean that they don't have a problem with dick pics, rape, sexual assault, harassing messages.
Many people say that dating apps are basically like a bar. Nancy Jo rejects that comparison. She said it would only make sense if there was a bouncer at the entrance who divided people by the color of their skin, allowed racist and transphobic slurs, and grouped people together who fit society's ideas about physical beauty together, allowing them to get the most matches. That bar would also have to have models and actors hitting on people to represent the bots that many apps use to keep people swiping and engaged.
Would you really say, go to this bar? It's the most amazing place. Yes, it's transphobic and it's racist. And there might be people in there saying racist things. There's also like just the exploitive way that they take your money and take your data without your consent.
Since we're talking about the dark side of dating apps, I shared with Nancy Jo a couple of messages that I and a friend of mine have received about their own challenges. With their permission, here's a short excerpt. Tinder has destroyed my self-confidence. I can't seem to stop, though. It's the only way dating works now. And another. 8 years of dating app BS was so traumatic for me. I have been in therapy dealing with all of that and still struggle even though now I'm off of them. If any of that sounded like you, Nancy Jo wanted you to hear this.
Women are so judged on our relationships, on our quote unquote, success in having relationships. We're sort of like challenged from having success in relationships from the jump. So the first thing I would say is, it is not you. It is them. If you're feeling traumatized by the guys you're meeting on these apps, that's on them, not you. That's on this culture, not on you. I feel you. I carry around so much trauma from so many things that happened to me over my life before online dating even ever started. And that's why I wrote this recent book, Nothing Personal, is because I don't want to carry it around anymore. I don't think that I should stay silent about it. I am not ashamed of things that have happened to me or things I've done in the realm of sex and love and dating. I am not ashamed. And I'm not an angel. I'm not perfect. A lot of this shit was not my fault. And I stood up for myself. And I'm standing up for myself now. And you're not alone in feeling like you're addicted, because they designed it to be addicted. I had a young man that I interviewed become suicidal over it. And he went to therapy, and the doctor that he dealt with said, you have to find something to replace this. You need to get a hobby. So he started swing dancing. In the pandemic, I started playing chess online. And I've met all these people through chess. This is a lie that this is the only way to meet people. If I can meet people through playing chess and Alex can meet people through swing dancing, you can still take back the reins of your life, take back your power.
There is so much of this idea, taking her power back, in Nothing Personal. It's something she wants for so many others, and something she has worked hard for in her own life. Near the end of the book, she wrote, walking along with the hordes of New Yorkers rushing home at dusk in Manhattan, it was as if I had disappeared completely, and it felt mystic and light. The street used to be a place where you thought you might be seen by some handsome stranger, someone who would make you feel you mattered even more. And I was always looking for that stranger, always searching for that someone who could make me feel that I had been seen. And now, I was free from that thought. If you relate to Ginelle's story and her quest to seek a sense of home and ease and acceptance inside herself, she wanted you to hear this.
That I have practices that influence my beliefs. Something as arbitrary as journaling on a daily basis influences my sense of self and influences how I feel about myself. I do yoga, I have communities, I make sure I get enough sleep, I have a healthy diet for me, and I don't use healthy in the diet culture way, but what works for me. I feel like it's all about the patterns that you set up in your life. Everybody has different energy and different resources, but doing the best that you can with those and building your life around you. Yeah, that's what has helped me to build a sense of self that I feel good in. From there, thought patterns can change. Because if I'm not eating, if I'm not sleeping, if I'm not journaling or taking care of myself, then my thought patterns are in the dumpster. I'm really spiraling or I'm out of it. And so I think I just try to take really good care of myself, maybe is the summary of that.
Find Ginelle's book, Make a Home Out of You, a memoir, most anywhere books are sold. Follow her on Instagram at Ginelle Testa and learn much more about her work at GinelleTesta.com. Nothing Personal, My Secret Life in the Dating App Inferno by Nancy Jo Sales is also available at most independent and commercial booksellers. Check out her documentary Swiped, Hooking Up in the Digital Age, on HBO or Amazon Prime, and learn more about her at nancyjosales.com. And if you're enjoying Girl Boner Radio, I would so love it if you would share links with your friends, drop them a text, post one on social media, or if you would go over to Spotify or the Apple Podcast app, that's the purple one on your iPhone, and give me a rating and quick review. Thank you so much for listening.